I have a proposal that we take all the money people spend on doing diversity panels and just use all that money to like hire women to make things.
Whether she's on a film set or on a stage at a political rally, actress, producer, and director America Ferrera has built a career fighting against the labels that everybody told her would hold her back. She was the first Latina and the youngest person ever to win an Emmy Award in a leading role for her character in Ugly Betty. And her speech in this summer's hit Barbie film resonated with audiences across the world when she goes on a rant about the double standards and pressures that women face. For this series of BBC 100 Women, we sat down with America Ferrera to chat about her experience growing up as the daughter of immigrants in Los Angeles, the need to have more representation on screen, and how she uses what she calls her superpower.
America Ferrera, thank you so much for sitting down with BBC 100 Women and for taking some time out of what seems like a very busy awards schedule.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You just received the Jane Fonda Humanitarian Award, Glamour UK Women of the Year, Latino Power List, and now us, BBC 100 Women. It's a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you, and thank you for the honor of being on the list with such incredible other women.
Okay, let's start with an easy question. Let's talk about your name. America. What's the true story behind your name?
Yeah, well, I'm named America after my mother, who is also named America. And it's true, growing up in the United States of America, everyone assumed that it was a patriotic homage by my immigrant parents. But the truth is that in Latino America, the name America is much more common. And so my mother's actually named after a very obscure holiday that she was born on called Dia de las Americas. And I was due on her birthday. And so I was also named America. so my name is very Central American and Latino Americana.
That's a name that you didn't love when you were younger, was it?
No, it was very hard to grow up with a name like America. I mean, it's hard to grow up, period. It's hard to grow up with anything that sort of sets you apart and makes you different from other people. And I always say, like, the first day of school was always like my worst nightmare, because that was the day that every teacher called out America and everyone turned to see whose name was America. So I went by my middle name, which is Georgina, growing up. And then when I left high school, I started using my first name.
Being the daughter of Honduran immigrants, you dance a dance many of us do, of wanting to fit into two worlds at once, right? And sometimes being stuck between cultures. Where did you feel at home?
I felt at home performing. I felt at home on stage, creating, rehearsing, directing, learning choreography in my den with my sisters and my friends. And I felt at home in my creative life. And that is where I kind of came to know myself, because it's true, I was kind of not fully one or the other, in some ways fully both, and yet not completely anything, you know? And like so many people's experiences, especially in the United States, growing up between a culture at home that you're rooted in versus the mainstream culture that is very dominant and also doesn't really reflect you. It's a pretty confusing space to try to grow up in and find your identity. And so for me, I clung to art, and I clung to performance and acting, and also academics, because I had been taught so early on throughout my whole life by my parents, specifically my mother, that, you know, education and taking advantage of every opportunity I had to get an education was why they immigrated to the United States. And so between, you know, my education and my love of performing, that's where I tried to shape an identity for myself.
You've spoken about the labels you've had to fight against in your career. Too brown, too chubby, too poor, too unsophisticated. That's pretty hard for a young girl to hear. What kept you going?
It's a good question. You know, it's hard to say exactly what keeps somebody's ambition and dream alive and ability to persist against what seems like all the odds. You know, I do think that I had this innate, from a very young age, sense of like, this is what I'm here to do and be. And there's naivete in that, and there's delusion in that. And I think coupled with that is that, for better or for worse, I was raised with the idea of the American dream being the thing that my parents left everything they knew for, so that I could have access to it. And so I was inculcated with that. I truly believed that if I had a dream and I was willing to work hard, then why wouldn't I be able to achieve what I wanted to? And the more unlikely it seemed to the people around me, the better the story, right? You know, Americans love an underdog story, you know, and not to say that you know, that it wasn't hard. It was really hard, and oftentimes I look back at my certainty at such a young age. I feel like I've had to tell this story so many times in a way that sort of validates this pie in the sky idea of the American dream, right? If I could do it, anyone could do it. But I think the more I learn, the more I know that that is not true. You know, there was a really devastating new research that just came out of the Annenberg Center, which, you know, says that based on the data, representation has not changed for Latinos in the media for 16 years. And so while I enjoy an incredible career full of opportunity that I have fought hard for and worked hard for, I know that the vast reality for Latinos in this industry is that it's as difficult today as it was 16 years ago or even 22 years ago when I started out to build a career and to tell stories and to be seen and to be reflected in our culture. And so, you know, I think that it's complicated to reconcile sort of the almost fairy tale story of my journey with what I know is the reality for the vast majority of people like me.
Talking about representation, you were the first ever Latina to win an Emmy Award for a leading role. Why do you think it took until 2007 for a Latina to get there?
Well, it's 2023 and I'm still the only, which I think is, you know, points exactly to the issue. It took so long because those opportunities don't exist, you know, to go back to how lucky and fortunate I have been in my career to be coming up in a time where I was met with the sparse opportunities that exist for a young Latina actress to get to be the lead in her own story, much less a lead that is self-determining and is not represented as a poor immigrant criminal or a hypersexualized Latina. It was an anomaly, and they are anomalies, these moments where Latinos get to shine. And of course we've had those moments, but those moments are exceptions. They are not the rule for what is possible for Latinos in this industry. And you know, I feel like we've all been waiting a really long time for the watershed, right? For the moment where our success is no longer ruled out as an exception to the rule, but where our consumer power, our audience power, you know, the business model in and of itself dictates and demands that that stories and media be told to reflect us. And we've spent a very, very long time admiring the problem of the lack of representation, and admiring the problem has not necessarily fixed it.
You've spoken about how you decided at some point that your identity is your superpower. How did that change come about?
Yeah, I mean, I was basically told my whole life and in the early parts of my career that everything that I was standing in the way of me being able to live my dream, you know, that I wasn't this traditionally beautiful, sexy, bombshell Latina actress. I had basically been told my whole childhood that everything that I was would stop me from being able to achieve my dream of being a storyteller and an actress in television and film. And right from my very first movie role ever, where I played a 17-year-old Latina daughter of immigrants, you know, hustling to make her dream of getting an education a reality, it was so disproven immediately that we could tell stories about people like us that would resonate and resound and connect to people all over the world from all different backgrounds. And the fact that I am who I am and that I'm representative of so many people who have not seen themselves reflected is a superpower, because in a way, there's so much untapped creativity. There's so many untapped stories and perspectives, and that is a superpower, because at least in the US, you know, we're the fastest growing demographic.
You are.
And we're not going anywhere. So to me, that's a superpower. Really being true and authentic to what I uniquely can give and say and can contribute to storytelling and to my different communities. And that's what I'm most proud of. And, you know, whatever the words are that people use to describe me are, yes, they're flattering and they feel, you know, like exaggerations. But I can say that I am most proud of the fact that I love with my whole heart almost all of the work that I've gotten to do as an actress and as an advocate, and that makes me proud.
Across the world, the political landscape is quite complex, to say the least. Looking ahead, how has your approach to your work in politics changed?
I think so much is changing domestically for us in the US, globally for everyone in the world. My focus as an engaged citizen in my domestic politics is about voter engagement and keeping people engaged in the process. I think one of the biggest dangers to democracy is just our despondency and our feeling that it won't make a difference if we are paying attention and showing up. And I feel that, you know, I have shifted the equation from sort of being behind any particular one person as the solution to political issues, and shifted more towards, you know, a healthy democracy is about the engagement of people en masse. And so I try to focus my efforts and my energy on engaging people and engaging voters and keeping them invested in the outcomes of our elections, because those outcomes most certainly create the conditions of our lives.
I didn't play with dolls growing up. I didn't play with Barbies growing up. The Barbie world didn't feel necessarily like representative of me.
We have heard you in the record-breaking film Barbie, delivering one of the most powerful monologues on screen about the pressures of being a woman in today's society. Why do you think these shape us so badly? And how much of your own human experience have you seen reflected in those epic monologues?
I mean, I think part of the catharsis of getting to watch stories and to watch our own experiences reflected back at us is how invisible those experiences feel when they're not reflected back to us, when you know, the whole story isn't told, and we have to sit and live with feelings like anger and resentment and righteousness, and that, you know, or even joy, right? Joy and silliness and fun that don't get reflected back at us, that there's no expression of those versions of our experience, and so to get to witness those expressions is a cathartic feeling, and for so many of us, there are so many of those experiences that have never been, you know, shared in culture, shared in mainstream media. And the truth is that, you know, so many of us underrepresented communities are still just fighting to be visible. You know, never mind exploring all the different versions of our creativity and our expression. We're just trying to exist, you know, to look up and see ourselves in the picture. It is a human need to be seen and to be mirrored and to know, oh, I'm here, I exist. I'm real and my experiences are real. And, you know, I mean, I think that's what art and storytelling and culture does for some more than others, and why it is such a cathartic experience to see feelings like anger expressed when that's something that you've lived with but have been told always is not appropriate to express as women of color. But I'm interested and curious in all the different versions of that unexpressed experience. And I think for women and for women of color and underrepresented communities, there is so much expansion that should and can and needs to happen for our own artistic and creative expression that just there has not been room for. And so when we get to kind of push a boundary further and further and further and see versions of ourselves that we've never gotten to see expressed in the culture, it feels like a win. It feels like victory. It feels like catharsis, and also like validation. Like, yes, I too am here and have this experience of life.
Feminism. Feminism takes on many different fights. Which one is yours?
I think for me, in my own journey as a feminist, I am exploring what has been unexpressed, you know, exploring the confines which I've existed within for many reasons, for intergenerational legacy reasons, for culture reasons, for survival reasons. And I think that as women, as feminists, there's so much untapped power in all the different assets of ourselves, and that we often have to divorce ourselves from parts of ourselves that are not welcome in spaces. And so I think for me personally, I'm attempting to root my feminism in my wholeness and getting to be all of the things I am in whatever space I'm in.
One of the many avenues of your activism came as part of the Me Too movement, where you openly spoke about your own experience with sexual assault. What has to be done to make sure that other women or more women have the resources and the support to speak up?
I mean, we have to have systems and institutions that prioritize safety for women and empower women to speak up and don't punish women for speaking up, kind of intrinsically or explicitly. You know, so much of it is cultural and internalized, how much power we feel in any given situation. And that kind of culture, which is like the air we breathe, is often the harder thing to change. It's very hard to change that when the systems that remain are still set up to benefit people who've always been in positions of power. And so we have to see power shift. Things will not change, and people's sense of empowerment will not change just because we want them to. They'll change when we very purposefully deconstruct and rebuild how we do things.
Yeah.
And we have to do that by centering the experiences and the voices of the people who oftentimes have the least power in the situation.
You will soon make your debut as a director. How do you feel about stepping behind the camera? Will America Ferrera behind the camera be any different?
I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I love directing. It's a very different creative role than being an actress who's chosen and picked to say these words, which I love doing most of the time. But it's a different level of creative empowerment to get to put your perspective on a story and to tell it the way that I want to tell it, which is not the way that anybody else alive can do it, because I am the only one who is me.
What does Hollywood need to do to make more women stand behind the camera? Because the gender gap is still quite a big issue, isn't it?
Well, I think people just have to make the decision to hire women. Like, it's that simple. And pay them and make it possible for them to make a living doing the work, and just do it. I mean, it's really not that magical or secret. I have a proposal that we take all the money people spend on doing diversity panels and just use all that money to hire women to make things and women of color. I wouldn't be mad if I never had to do another diversity panel, and if they took all that money and just used it to really fund women and people of color. It's really not that complicated. They have to commit to it, want it, and do it, and understand that it isn't about charity. It's about good business. And sadly, what we often see in difficult times in our industry is a complete retraction of the support of women and people of color. That the initiatives or the money set aside for diversity efforts all goes away. Those programs and those positions are the first to go when we fall on tough times, which really tells us where our priorities are, which really tells us what we believe in. Everybody who wants it can just make the choice to hire more women and people of color and support with your money and not just with your words the work of women and people of color. And so, it's not magic, really.
It's just making the decision.
It's just making the decision.
And it's not just films, also football, right? Natalie Portman founded the first female football team for your native city of Los Angeles. Why did you decide to be part of it?
Oh, so many reasons for deciding to jump on to Angel City Football Club. And, everything from the excitement of being a part of a women's professional football team to creating a new way to treat female athletes, to pay them equally, to support them the way their male counterparts are supported in the sport. And so the heart of Angel City speaks directly to what I want to see for women across all industries, which is equal pay and equal treatment. And to add to that, it's Los Angeles, and I'm born and raised in LA, and I'm a public school kid. I grew up in the Los Angeles Unified School District, and what I had access to was whatever I could get publicly. And so to get to be a part of a team who is so devoted to giving back to Los Angeles and to the youth of Los Angeles and making the world of sports more accessible to them, whether that's through sports bras for girls who need them to stay on a team, to feeding their families so they can not be hungry while they're at school. There's so much beautiful work that Angel City is doing off the pitch and on the pitch, and I mean, it's just like a dream to get to be a part of it.
What would you say to your 9-year-old self who dreamt about being an actress and a civil rights lawyer?
I have nothing to say to her. She had it down. She had it on lock. She knew what she wanted. I mean, I guess the only thing I could say to her is like, you got this. Like, keep going. You're on track. You know what you want. And you know, she had a lot of faith, and she had a lot of belief in herself. And oftentimes I have to go back to her and be like, what do you have to say to me? You know, as it gets harder to climb up the mountain, you know. That 9-year-old girl inspires me every day to keep going. She was up against a lot, and she made it, so.
Well, America, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to BBC 100 Women. It was an absolute pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much.